course, when we said we're now recording, most everybody jumped on mute real quick, so. But that's okay. I'm going to wait about another 4 minutes before I jump in and get started. I've still got people coming in, so.
How many total persons are on this committee?
Ooh. I did not count them up.
Okay.
We've probably got, I think, 1 or 2 more to jump on. Christina sent me this very nice list, and I could look it up on my computer, I suppose.
That's okay. Right.
Mark is by your, what is that, Mark? Is that Steamboat Rock or something down? You're on mute. And hi, Paul. I saw you came on.
Oh, sorry, Steve. Yeah, I was talking muted, but yeah, that's Steamboat Rock and Dinosaur.
Cool.
And there's
Nice
my boat there floating down the.
Oh yeah, I see it. I didn't see that before.
That's
Nice.
kind of behind my head. Cool spot though. You've been there, I take it.
I have been there once. It's been a while, but I've been there, and I keep saying, you know what, I need to get back.
Yeah, it's quite an impressive place.
It is.
Do you know Harding Hole, Mark?
I don't know Harding Hole. Is that along the Green River somewhere in there?
It's along the Yampa in the park.
Okay,
along that
no,
road.
I haven't floated the Yampa.
Yeah, I went camping there a few years ago for a couple nights, and it was like one of the most amazing camping trips I've ever done.
Yeah, it's a pretty special place, and it's off the beaten track. You know, it's way up there in the state, and it's not on the major interstate, and it's kind of not really on the way to anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's not.
Yeah, the river was like the temperature of a swimming pool the whole time. So.
Yeah, well, it's probably awesome. A little bit later in the that river. You know, that the Yampa is totally free flowing, so it has a huge peak, and then then it gets real low. And once it gets low and slow, it really warms up.
Isn't it the only free flowing river in the state at this point?
It might well be. You know,
they're talking about damming it.
It's dammed above there at Flaming Gorge.
Yeah. Because I think there's some idea to move water into Denver from the Yampa, involving damming it.
Mark, where are you?
Well, I'm here in Englewood.
Well, where is that location behind you?
That location is in Dinosaur National Monument, and this is actually this spot that and Steve identified it correctly. It's called Steamboat Rock, and it's a really impressive rock feature. There is right at the confluence of the Green and Yampa rivers. There, Dinosaur National Monument. It's really a neat unit. It's best known for these impressive exposure of fossils, but it also just has beautiful wilderness out there as well.
Great. Got to get there.
Highly recommend it. Well, Steve, I apologize. I'm done pitching Dinosaur.
No problem. So I'm trying to make sure that I've got everybody on and cross-checking against my list here. I usually start about a minute or two after, just to make sure that I've got everybody in. So, and Christina, you may be just slightly more familiar with that list. I'm missing, I think, 1 or 2 people from the. Let's see, do I have Monica? Monica? Nope. I don't see Monica here.
There's Monica coming on.
Oh, I think Monica just clicked in there.
Okay. Maybe that's Monica's backyard there. We just saw it show up.
So.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, the only person we're missing is Porvy, it looks like.
And I'm here for Porvy.
Oh, Steve's here for Porvy, so I think we've got everybody.
I was gonna say that. Let me get started. If you're at all comfortable turning your video on, I think that's a nice thing to do. I don't know that it's mandatory, but if you're willing to do that, I think that helps just make these conversations over Zoom a little bit more personable. So if you can do that. And I want to welcome you. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy evening and probably all of the other things that you could be running around doing. I will I believe we have our meeting for somewhere between an hour and an hour and a half. I'll certainly get you done on time. And Porvy is unable to attend, and so Steve Kelly is here in her place. I also want to thank all of you for your emails, your thoughts, your ideas, your suggestions, the conversations we had, all of that good stuff over the past week. I really appreciate that. As far as expectations go, it's always a little bit of a challenge to have a vigorous ongoing conversation when we're all in different places and trying not to step on each other's toes as we're commenting. So we'll work our way through that. Sometimes it's helpful if you want to raise your hand. Those are the little, you've got that little option. Where is it here? It's down on the bottom. You can raise your hand and it'll show a little yellow hand up. The other thing is, if you're just not quite quick enough with that mouse click, you raise your hand like this and I'll see it and make sure that you get a chance to talk. So we want to make sure that we hear from everybody. The other thing is, if you're not talking, you might want to put yourself on mute. That just helps manage some of the background sounds and making sure that we can all hear each other okay. That's about all I think I need to cover to get us started. What I'm hoping, optimistically, that we can accomplish this evening. There were some sort of, I would say, basic assumptions that I made coming out of the emails that I got from everybody. I want to check those because we're always going to be in trouble if we operate on those without clarifying them. I'm sure there'll be some discussion around them. So I want to spend a little bit of time right off early in our meeting checking those assumptions and maybe those criteria that we're looking at. And then I'm really hoping that we can look at some of the specific parks and we can say, here's kind of what we have for ideas when it comes to this park or that park, and come out of today's meeting with some fairly specific ideas. I don't know what that's going to look like when we get ready to put that back to council. It may be sort of a la carte where council can say, well, we like a little bit of this and we like a little bit of that. It may be a phased process. It may be a list of priorities with top priorities and then priorities if we can get to them. But we've got to move towards that direction in what we're accomplishing this evening. So that's the direction I'm headed. Any comments, any questions before I jump into clarifying some of the assumptions or criteria? Okay, what I heard, and when I say this, I didn't hear it from everybody, and I'm not sure that everybody will agree, but I heard a fairly strong notion that there should be at least a portion of some of the more used larger parks that are designated as space for unleashed dogs and their owners. I also heard within that exact same sentence that these somehow needed to be separated, enclosed, set apart from either the other people that are using the park or the sports that are using the park or any kind like that. And I know that's probably a big one, jumping right in. I heard people talk about these should be variable sizes. There should be a distinction maybe between, big dogs or little dogs. Cost is sometimes a concern. Logistics, creative designs. So let me pause. That's something I heard pretty loud and strong on emails. Did I get that right? Did I miss it? Tell me what you guys think. Yeah, Steve?
Well, I would not be in that camp. I don't know that there needs to be separation as what I think I heard from the group at the last meeting. I listened, I wasn't involved in it. But Englewood Unleashed is not for that type of separation or that drastic a separation that I've heard.
Okay, I'll come back and ask you about the drastic and what kind of separation Englewood Unleashed might be willing to look at or consider, because I know there were a number of different issues that were brought up about when sports and dog owners mingle or sports and other folks mingle. So hang on to that. I'll come back and ask about that. Jake?
So your audio cut out for me for a minute. You're saying the basic assumption is that the off-leash dogs should be physically separated from other.
In some way, that is a reoccurring theme that I heard through the emails that I received over the past week.
Yeah, I think so, because I think why we're here is the conflict that comes with the off-leash dogs keep spilling out into other groups of people that are not interested in interacting with strange dogs. And I also think it's just worth noting that it's just the norm. It's just what basically every other city does. In the metro area, there's one off-leash, unfenced off-leash area in a far-flung part of Westminster that's far from other houses, and there's no other facilities. It's just a big patch of weeds. And other than that, as far as I know, there's no other place in the metro area. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but I don't know of anything like what Englewood has. It's extremely aberrant, and I don't think there's no reason for that. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, and I want to hasten to add that, you know, I don't know exactly what that looks like. I'm framing this in a bit more of a general way, as saying that, you know, I did hear that there needs to be some kind of separation. That's what I'm saying. Other comments, other thoughts? Is that a reasonably accurate, Martha? And then Alan.
Yeah, I agree that there should be a fence. If you're gonna have sports, if you have a playground, there has to be a fence with the dogs. I've been to a couple of, I'm close to Jason and to Rotolo and Canine. And day in, it doesn't matter what time, there's always dogs out there. And I've noticed that over at Rotolo, there are more kids playing there and families there than there is at Jason Park. And I think it has to do with the dogs, because you don't see a lot of dogs being loose out there. You know, they might be in the bowl, but like last night I was walking by there, and there were like, I think 3 or 4 dogs, but they were all on a leash, and the kids were just playing, and it was like there was no worries. And I think that's what this, you know, it's all about safety. You know, the dogs, you know, they're out there to play, and you know, families want to be there, you know, as a whole, but with them being on leash and no fence, you're just waiting for an accident to happen.
Okay, Alan.
Yeah, Alan here. I'm the president for Pirate Esports, and I helped start this program 7 years ago. And I have a couple dogs myself, and you know, I just feel like since I've had nothing but complaints from my parents and my coaches and my directors about dogs, maybe dog owners not picking up the dog poop, but also, you know, I've witnessed myself because I coach 5 different sports throughout the season. I'm at a park, and here comes a dog running rampant, and the owner's like, oh, just come over, dog's fine, it's fine. Not really when you just whacked the ball out of my kid's hand, or you just ran a kid over, or you're trying to attack a dog on a leash. I just don't understand that part. And that's the hard part for me when I'm trying to grow something for our community. I have 2 young kids. I've helped start this thing. I have a great relationship with the city. I love off-leash dog parks, sure, but I don't like when owners can't control their dogs. And when it comes down to the end of the day, you know, people are like, it's fine. Well, it wasn't fine when my kid was holding a sandwich and the dog came up and ate my kid's sandwich. I mean, literally that happened. So I just have a problem with that. And you know what the dog owner said? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's a bunch of baloney. You know, what's going to happen when that dog bites the kid's hand in the sandwich? You know, who's in trouble? Who's going to be responsible for that? Englewood off-leash? Are they going to take responsibility for that? I want to know that answer, because right now the liability goes right back on Pirate Esports.
It would be the dog owner, I believe.
Well, if you can keep that dog owner there and hold that dog owner responsible for it.
Okay.
So I understand what.
So we can come back and we can talk about, you know, liability concerns and those kinds of issues. What I'm trying to do is I did get a lot of feedback during the week, and it was really helpful. And I'm trying to get some sort of basic criteria that we can then start moving forward with and saying, okay, here's what we can propose if we can reach a consensus on what that criteria looks like. So let me go to Mark. You had your hand up, then let me go back to Jake.
Well, sure, Steve, thanks. I mean, I've sort of expressed my opinion that, I think the right way forward is for the city to really take a hard look at expanding enclosed dog parks and try to find places for dog parks of different scales, across the system so that, people have these things accessible, in their neighborhoods, and they can provide that opportunity for people that they enjoy to, let their dogs off leash, play with other dogs, and in a setting where these conflicts that are associated with the off leash privileges are just resolved once and for all. I do understand that people really enjoy the aesthetics of being able to run their dogs in, a park with green grass and, the kinds of things that are maintained by the city. I get that people like that, but I think, my opinion is that it's not an enormous concession to ask folks to get behind an alternative way of doing things that resolves these conflicts. And I just wish so much that what we could do is agree on some kind of path forward along those lines, and then start focusing on ways to create these enclosed managed spaces that have the aesthetic properties that people are looking for, because they can be nice, I think. They may not look like a sports field, but I think they can be good facilities that are properly designed for people who want to run their dogs off leash. And one of the problems I think with this conversation is that we're not all on the same page that there's even a problem with conflicts and off leash dog use. Frankly, Englewood Unleashed, appears to be pretty invested in the status quo. So when that's the case, then it's really hard to agree that any response is required, because what I keep hearing, basically, if their preferred course of action is to change nothing. So that's just a concern. I wish we could get a little reset on that and start trying to envision a scenario that provides all of our Englewood dog owners, including people like me, with really good places to go run their dogs off leash and have a good time, where there's not conflicts with sports, where there's not the potential for kids to get hassled or even bitten on playgrounds, and where they're not, interfering with Englewood's, pavilion rental program and a bunch of the problems that we've heard about over time on the commission. So that's where I wish we were going.
Okay, so let me see if I can figure out a way to get there, because we heard a lot about that last week, or was it 2 weeks ago? And I don't want to spend all of our time this week just talking about the same problems that we heard about 2 weeks ago. I'm going to come back to Steve and Paul. I believe both of you are representing Englewood Unleashed. I'll come back to you in just a minute, and I want to ask you, help me address Mark's concern that maybe Englewood Unleashed's perspective is there's nothing wrong, everything's fine, let's just leave it as it is. But I promised Jake, and then Kate's got her hand up, and then I want to come back to Paul and Steve.
So yeah, just to follow up what Mark said, obviously there's a problem because we're here, and council has been dealing with this issue for years and years. So there's obviously not everyone's happy. And I think a good compromise is if we consider the original subcommittee recommendations as a starting point from which to negotiate. I think just to sort of broach a sort of concrete idea, I personally think it would be a good idea to every park that has an off-leash designation right now, so Centennial, Jason, Duncan, Northwest Greenbelt, I think an enclosure in each of those parks is the only way, it's the least disruptive way to reach that compromise, because the thing is, if you start changing designations of parks, then people who have a routine around that park, they have to drive to the park, their routine is suddenly upended. And building enclosures in the existing off-leash parks is the only way to increase access to each park without excluding anybody. And I know in the emails, there was some talk about turning Rotolo into an off-leash park, which I think is a bad idea. That scheme is exactly why we're here today. And if that was to happen, I think the people that have lived there for years and decades, their routine would be completely upended. My routine, personally, full disclosure, would be upended, because I go there, like Martha said, I go there often with my kids because there's a very low chance of having to deal with off-leash dogs. And I think if something like that were to happen, council would hear a lot of pushback and the plan would get rejected again. So I think the least disruptive way that nobody has to change their routine is just to add enclosures in the existing off-leash parks. Also, as it pertains to Rotolo, just would put out there that it is a detention pond. It functions as a detention pond for floods, and it often floods once a year, maybe. And so fences are not really feasible there because they would catch debris and they would block flow of water. So that's kind of my idea.
Okay. So let me come back to your proposal after I get a few of these hands, okay? Kate?
Yes. So actually, I'm going to kind of build off of what Jake was just talking about, because in the email you sent to the group of us, you said there was, the 5 options of suggested off-leash dog parks. So I'm looking at it, and the top 3, Canine Corral, the Northwest Greenbelt, and Emerson Park, were a part of our original recommendations to be off-leash dog parks. Jason Park and Duncan Park are the 2 that we said we should close. So because Duncan Park wasn't on this list, it makes it seem to me that maybe we could all agree that Duncan Park is no longer necessary, doesn't need to be a dog park. And then the new discussion would be more about the Jason Park, which I think is our most contentious park all the way around. So maybe we focus on that if everyone's in agreement that Duncan doesn't need to be an off-leash dog park. Because I mean, that feedback sounds very much in line with our recommendations. That's kind of where I'm looking at it from.
Okay. Steve Young.
Yeah, it's ironic that now I'm kind of reiterating what Kate and Jake both said, but it seems like there's kind of a discussion between whether you're going to have fenced dog parks versus no fenced dog parks. But the proposal we put forward basically relieved that by saying we're going to fence in the playground at Northwest Greenbelt. We're going to leave Emerson wide open with no fences, which satisfies that. And then you have Canine Corral, and then we're looking to expand into what was a previously already semi-approved fenced dog park at Cushing. So I'm kind of concerned that we're not really going to get to a solution if the starting point is we don't want fences, but we don't want to give up any of the open dog parks. Like, it seems like that the proposal that was put forward kind of splits that divide. And I'm also in agreement with Kate that if Duncan's a pretty easy thing to knock off the list, that maybe that's something we can at least, put thumbs up with and have everybody agree with for one meeting, one of the 15 things we have to discuss.
Okay, appreciate that. Steve, Kelly, and Paul, help me with the kind of, and last meeting I talked about consensus and that it was never 100%, but there does seem to be a fairly strong consensus that some type of separation would be beneficial. What can Englewood Unleashed, what can they do to help us achieve this and help us find a compromise?
Well, I could begin, and then Paul, you could jump in. For Jason Park as a compromise, a fence that would run east-west from the parking lot on the north side of the playground, out to where the sheds are, could effectively separate the pavilion, the basketball court, the playground, and also give on the south, all that area to non-dog park users. It doesn't fence in the north side, and it gives the dogs a good bulk of that park. I know Pirate Youth Sports is over there. A compromise for that would be to have, like, based on what I heard, with contentious dog owners saying, I don't need to, I have a right to be here. On sports day, have like yard signs, and they, 4, one on each corner of the field, temporary, and you just put them up, and with effective words that the Daves could help us come up with, saying, this part of the park is closed to dogs at this point in time. And whenever that takes place, those signs are up, and that's one way to help get the message across.
Okay.
You know, as far as dog poop goes, I read one of the documents that you sent out, Steve, and, you know, it said, you know, there's dog poop on the field. Also on Rotolo Park, which is not an off-leash park, it said, you know, one of the problems dog poop is on the field. You know, there's always going to be dog poop on the field, you know, and there's always going to be people that want their dog, at least at the off-leash parks, want to have their dogs off-leash and have some freedom. And there's going to be people that don't, you know, that conflict, I'm sure, was there from the beginning.
Paul, you want to add to that? You're on mute right now.
Well, with respect to Duncan, I don't think it's workable to have a fence. If you're going to have a completely enclosed fence there, I can't imagine where you would put it, where it wouldn't affect, where somebody else isn't going to want to use it for something else. I mean, there's always going to, you know, the one big piece of grass there kids use for games. There aren't really any other there really aren't any other areas of size there, you know, that would be fencible. You know, one thing I think we have, you know, when I go there, I don't really go there and stand around. I usually just walk around. You know, I'll do a few loops, maybe walk, since I live fairly close to Duncan. You know, oftentimes when I go there, I'll walk there. I'll walk a few laps around, maybe some laps in the neighborhood, and I'm not necessarily like going there to stand there to talk to people all the time. And so it's not necessarily like just going to one area. I don't know how to address that within the context of everything else that we've been talking about. I know to your also to your point, you know, all of where you your first point, all of some parks and portions of some parks should be designated off leash. These areas should be fenced. I don't know that fencing is necessarily a problem. I think more people have problems with enclosure than they do with just fences. With fences as a visual barrier, you know, like something like Steve was talking about. You know, it could be a fence. It could be a fence run at Jason Park. It could be a fence running from the parking lot to the sheds and back. It could be an idea that I've had is to put maybe some not a chain link. I don't know if there's a kid safe type of what's that wooden ranch fence that you can and you know, we could put that around the playground. That gives a visual barrier. Dogs don't belong inside the fence, and we could have a fence that fences off the backfield from, you know, from the front field and this and the south and the south part of the field, so dogs could be in the main area in the front and off and in that area to the south of the basketball court. Jake, I think we were talking about Rotolo as an option if Jason was completely closed off to dogs. That Rotolo and by extension the Southwest Greenbelt, you know, since it's right across the street from Rotolo Park, you know, that could, you know, that if as long as the dog stayed down in the bowl, as long as it's not flooded, you know, because from having been there, I noticed that the playground there is up pretty high on the hill. It's not down in the bowl, and so it's pretty much just grass down in the bowl. Plus that gives easy access for people who don't just want to stand there with their dogs, but they want to move with them. You know, they can cross Huron and go into the southwest green belt. And so I think that's where that option came from, just as a suggestion if Jason Park was going to be fully closed off. So
Okay. So I saw you have your hand up, Jake, but let me stay with Steve and Paul for just a second. It sounds like if we could come up with some kind of a creative fence that maybe wasn't just a sterile looking chain link sort of harsh fence, that would be helpful. And it also sounds like if it's not fenced out on all four sides, that might give us a little bit of room to work and a little bit of room to try to find a solution. Is that a fair summary? Is that accurate?
I would say that would be a fair summary for Jason Park. Frankly, I'm not sure I don't know why, you know, what's the reasoning behind just closing Duncan off as a dog park? You know, I know there was a lot of discussion of data or lack thereof at the last meeting. It just seems like what I'm hearing is we're operating from a position of fear and what, you know, an eventuality that could happen. And a situation of, you know, we're the only city that's doing something or not doing something. Therefore, you know, we're unique. So we need to change that so we can be like everybody else. I know with Jason Park, I think there's been one incident, you know, in 10 months. So to say there's all kinds of conflict, I just, you know, I don't see it.
We also haven't had any sports there in the last 10 months or last 6 months or 7 months when we should have been playing soccer. And if you take Jason Park out of it and you put a fence right through it, it's gonna mess up our sport program. You know, we helped start this. We want kids to be at a park. I don't think parks should be fenced off everywhere. I mean, if you want to take a park and that maybe youth sports doesn't utilize right now, use those parks if you want, or, you know, maybe fence it off like Littleton does. They have 2 different parks, and one park you're here for 3 weeks, and then they transfer it over to this park, so it doesn't get all dirt like the one over there on Windermere, right? I agree. I've taken my dog over there. It's crappy. It's dirty. It's gross. It's disgusting. Why can't we fix that park to where we have grass on both sides? Maybe invest in that. But to put fences around your playground and put fences around everything else, it just makes no sense. It sounds like a cost prohibitive and doesn't make sense to me. So I understand that you might live near Jason Park and you're one of the guys that probably obey the rules and are there on time or not there during our time for our kids to be there. But when I'm losing kids and I'm getting calls from parents and I'm getting emails from parents saying, I'm not coming back because you guys can't control the parks. We call the police. They don't show up for 30 to 40 minutes. It just becomes like Englewood again, doing it again. Why do our kids not go to Englewood High School because of this? You know, it's always something else. And it just makes me upset because I bought my house 20 years ago. My kids are growing up here. I want my kids to go to school here. I want a safe place. And, you know, you say it hasn't happened yet. But when it does happen, who's really liable? I'm sure Englewood off-leash is not liable. You say, oh, the dog owner's liable.
So let me.
That's true. Everybody is responsible for their animal.
Let me jump in on the liability
I get
piece.
it, but you're not taking any responsibility for anybody but
Alan,
Englewood off-leash.
Alan, let me
Sorry.
jump in on
Sorry, I'm
that's
passionate.
okay. I understand that. That's fine. Let me jump in on the liability piece. I don't want that solely to drive this conversation. I think there's been a lot of different components that do influence the interaction between, I would say, probably irresponsible dog owners and the rest of the public who wants to borrow or use the park. Monica,
For sure, but who's going to handle that? Who's going to take that?
That's what we're trying to figure out, Alan. We'll get that figured out. I got to let Monica and then Dave Lewis talk.
I'm excited to hear what Dave Lewis has to say about this, but I'll just chime in with the fact that I sit on both sides of this fence. I'm a dog owner, and I see the value of the parks as a dog owner, but I'm also a youth sports coach, and scheduling and finding spaces for kids to play sports is it's difficult. And if you can find a space in your community for kids, I mean, I don't even have kids, and I love my dog more than anything, but those kids deserve a safe place to play where their parents can be watching them play without, you know, watching out for rando dogs coming up. And I know that all the people in Englewood off-leash are probably so responsible, but the reality is not every pet owner picks up after their pet. Not every pet owner watches their pet. And, you know, maybe there's not a lot of documented cases of tragic incidents, but there's clearly a lot of incidents happening, interactions. And we have to think, you know, I'm hearing a lot that we love our dogs, but we have to love our kids too. And we have to take care of our spaces. So maybe Dave, you can add to that in some way, but I really like what Mark is saying. I mean, you all make a great point, but the reality of the situation is that we're all sitting here because there's a conflict. And, you know, God bless our dogs, but, you know, let's think about our kids too.
Fair enough. Dave?
Hey, everyone. First off, everyone is making such great points here. I really appreciate the fact that Steve and Paul are coming forward with some compromising ideas. From the enforcement standpoint, and you guys have all heard me speak about this, Monica has heard me, the Parks and Rec, that the way that our parks are designed currently and the way that our ordinances are written make it very difficult for us to do any kind of enforcement because everything is so up to interpretation. I have done some informal polling at different parks. Jason Park was one of the biggest ones, where people are saying to me when asked, they appreciate having that because it is fenced on 3 sides. They would appreciate having a more designated, safer space where they know this is where their animals can be, whether that's Jason or Emerson, is a clear set expectation. It's very difficult for us from an enforcement side to just slap up a bunch of signs or even have Pirates Youth Sports put up signs with the expectation that the community is going to read those signs and abide by them, because I've seen that people don't even read the current signs that we have. I think having designated space, and I've spent a lot of time since our last meeting around Canine Corral and around Bellevue Park, and meeting with those folk. They're very passionate about that park. Yes, some of you have said there are maybe some maintenance issues that could be addressed. They love that park. They take care of that park. They take care of each other. They watch out for each other. They bring water. They bring balls. And they're very protective of each other. We are not seeing, and I know you're talking about data. I don't think we're ever going to provide data that's going to support one case or another. We are seeing data when we have problems. We are not seeing the same level of conflict between participants, and that's all participants, like at Canine Corral. We're not getting called there for unruly interactions between guests. We're not getting called there for animal bites. We are just not seeing that level of frustration from the community about Canine Corral. And I think it's because it is a clearly designated space where everyone feels comfortable and they know that they can go there with their animal. They all look out for each other. They all follow the rules. I sat there in not my uniform. I was not in a marked car, and I watched how everyone put their animal on leash. They walked to the gate. They opened the gate. They were safe, and they participated, and they left. I didn't see any conflict with people or any conflict with pets.
Dave?
Appreciate that. Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, for a lot of the positive stuff that I heard, I thought you were talking about Jason Park, about how people were looking out for themselves and everybody else. So, I mean, the same can be said for Jason Park. With the exception of, of some of the incidents. Well, I can't say incidents plural because, again, I believe there's only data for one. I know data is a hard thing, but we police ourselves at Jason Park. We take care of ourselves. We look out for ourselves. And, frankly, there might not be much trouble at Canine Corral because the people that don't want to be around dogs for whatever reason don't go there. So there's naturally no complaints.
So I want to grab what I feel like is at least an opportunity to build some kind of a consensus, some kind of a compromise. I heard both Steve and Paul, and I think I'm summarizing you correctly, saying that some kind of separation, some kind of maybe even enclosure, if it's not four sides, is understandable and something that Englewood Unleashed may be able to get behind. I don't want to spend the rest of the evening arguing about exactly what that looks like. I think that might be something we do between now and next meeting and figure out. But I think that gives us some ground to work on. It does provide some separation. It does provide some safety for those who are concerned about liability. It does provide uninterrupted, games and opportunities for that. So, Paul and Steve, am I safe moving forward saying that you could get behind something that provided separation as long as it was designed in a creative and reasonable way?
Go ahead, Paul.
I think we would prefer fencing in a park to having no off-leash park at all.
Okay.
I think that would, yeah.
Okay.
I've the people I've been talking to in the last couple of weeks, both at Duncan and at Jason, I think that's the general sense that, if that's what it takes to keep a part of the park off leash, if it takes some kind of, if it takes some kind of visual cue, if it takes some kind of fencing or something else to keep, to be able to keep that going, to be able to use at least some of the park some of the time, that's better than not being able to use any of the park any of the time.
Appreciate that. That helps clarify it. Jake, I see your hand up. I'm ready to move to my next assumption. If you got a couple of last things you need to say on this, we'll obviously have to revisit what this looks like, but if you got a couple of words, go ahead, and then I'm going to move on.
Yeah, I just think fencing, I think that you need to talk about full enclosures. I think a wall is a half measure or even a quarter measure. And the thing is, dogs are not going to know where they're supposed to be relative to the fence. People are not going to know where they're supposed to be relative to the fence, or they're going to pretend not to know. I think there's a lot of confusion on the part of the off-leash crowd, like genuine confusion as to the rules. They've been kind of convoluted with scheduling and stuff. And I think this would be another extremely ambiguous situation. And then rule breakers, people who do want to break the rules, they will just pretend that they don't know what side of the fence they're going to be on. And like Dave Lewis said, no amount of signage is going to convince anybody. A full enclosure makes it extremely clear to everybody where everything belongs. You cannot play dumb, or you cannot be confused about it. Everybody knows exactly where they're supposed to be. And so I just feel really strongly that I think putting up one wall of fence, it would have the negative aesthetic impact, which I acknowledge about fences, but with none of the benefits. We would just put up a big wall in the middle of the park and it just wouldn't change anything. And for the same reason, I was listening to what Alan was saying as far as a fenced area. I don't own any dogs, but I'm sympathetic to, I think it's a legitimate use of the park, off-leash dog use. My brother has a dog and he loves it to death. So as I do think a fenced area is necessary, including in Jason Park, out of a sense of realism. For one thing, I don't think council would go with undesignating Jason Park because it would cause too much pushback. I think that's part of why the last measure failed. And also, I don't think the off-leash crowd would stop doing what they do. I think people would still bring off-leash dogs to the park. And I think it would be very hard for the city to enforce it if Jason Park was just completely undesignated. And that's irrespective of the fact I don't think council would go for it. As far as Rotolo, if Rotolo is the new Jason Park, it'll be the new Jason Park in all respects, in that people will be really mad about it and the city will never hear the end of it. So that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Can I say one thing as far as Jason Park goes? There's a spot on the south side of the basketball courts. There's shade, there's grass, there's no interruption of soccer or t-ball pavilion. I think that could be an area where you could fence off. I know you want to move on, but I just wanted to throw that out. I think that on the south side of the east-west fence, if we don't enclose it, Jake, that could keep them off the main field. So that's all I wanted to throw that out. Thank you.
And my response to that would be whoever is going to get that south side, whether it be Pirate Youth Sports or the dog leash people, are going to lose 75% of the park's acreage.
Can I say something?
So can I let Lindsay go first? She's been patient. She's had her hand up, and then.
I can barely hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
No.
No?
I can hear you. It's almost like you're away from the mic.
We lost you, Steve.
Let me see if I can change microphones.
There you go.
Is
There
that
you
any better?
Yes.
Is that better?
Can I say something, Steve?
Sure.
Okay, this has to do with what Steve was saying at Jason Park, that there's really no incidences there. You're looking at a person whose dog has been attacked, has been bit. You're looking at a person that where Englewood Unleashed, a person came to me and because her dog was coming after my dog and ready to bite him. And she confronted me and said, let's get it on, let's fight. And my grandkids have been on the park and the dogs have been at them. So, I go to Jason, I live right there. I've been doing this for 30 years and I've seen so many dogs there and it's grown so much that it's gotten out of hand. And when you take the playground, you want to circle that playground, you're looking at a lawsuit because what if the parent is on the other side? They're going to have to jump over these fences to get to this child. So you're saying that the dogs are more important than the family. As far as the youth go, I think they should get that park back because it's like one guy told me from Englewood Unleashed, it's like the kids will get over about picking up poop. He says they'll get over it. I had another person to tell me, you know what, we're not gonna follow the rules because Englewood Leash is over 1,000 signatures and we got money in the bank. And if we can get as many tickets as we want, we don't care. We can do whatever we want. So when you're looking at that, what's the sense of having all these signages? Because there's signs everywhere, but they still ignore it. I just had an incident last week.
I'm not going to go with the sign piece because almost everybody had significant questions about the benefit and the value of signs. So I want to set that aside. I want to say that I'm trying to find some space that I can work in. I think that Paul and Steve gave us some room to say, hey, we realize that it might not be ideal, but if we have to come up with some kind of limitation or enclosure that still allows us to use a portion of these parks, that's better than not using these parks at all. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but that can be something we work on between now and the next time we meet. Lindsay, and then I really am going to move on to a couple of other things.
I also too just want to say it is great to hear everybody's ideas, and I'm glad that we can work together to find some solutions so that all parties can benefit, not just dog people or youth sports people, because it's about our whole community. So I'm glad we're speaking up for everybody. But just to kind of echo what everyone is saying, I think sorry, let me introduce myself a little bit more. I'm Lindsay. I'm with Parks and Recreation. I am the open space activity supervisor. So I am in charge of the field rentals, the pavilion rentals, anything that's outside, basically. So I hear a lot of things from a lot of people. We process a lot of refunds for pavilions, for fields, because of off-leash. I'm also a dog owner and I love dogs. And I, again, know that there are different solutions that we can reach together. Like the fencing off the south side of over by the basketball court at Jason would work well, in my opinion. But again, I know we want to move on, but just wanted to share a little 2 cents.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Let me move on to, there was, I think, a pretty solid agreement on in requiring some type of licensing. And again, I'm still back at, these are the things I heard in the email. I want to make sure we're all on the same page before we move forward and start putting some arms and legs and specifics to these. But there was a lot of support for some kind of licensing being required with a fee on that, and maybe some education, some responsibility. Those are the arms and legs that we can add later. But is there any serious concern about licensing, requiring some type of licensing for off-leash use? Jake?
I think it's a fine idea. I just think it just needs to be acknowledged that it in and of itself is not going to stop people from bringing unlicensed dogs.
Sure.
Running them off leash. So
Let me go with Mark and then Kate and then Monica.
Well, I also agree that it's a workable thing. I think it's an auxiliary measure that would, work best if it was accompanying other design changes in parks. I do think we need to be careful about thinking that a licensing system in Englewood is going to be an important, revenue stream for doing things like park improvements for dog parks. I guess I have that sort of instinct that we would be fortunate if we were able to set up a licensing program that raised enough revenue to pay for itself. Now, the idea of having fee differentials for residents and non-residents, I think, is an interesting one. Again, not so much because I think that it would bring in a lot of revenue, but because I think that the requirement for non-residents to pay a little more is likely to screen out some of the non-residents that are currently least likely to follow the rules and engage in the better behaviors around their dog use. So I do think that's an appropriate thing, but I think that the city's interest would probably be in ensuring that whatever these fees are, that they're relatively low, because Englewood is not a high income community across the board. So I think we need to be sensitive about that. But a system designed to pay for itself, I think, is probably a realistic goal.
Great. Kate?
Yeah, I would agree with what Mark said. And I would also say that one of the concerns I have in regards of a licensing program, although I think it would be a great potential revenue generator, is the lift of operating it. Would that fall in Parks and Rec or code enforcement, and how much of an extra effort is that? We are already kind of running thin and don't have a lot of funding to introduce new programs. We can't even get a dog park, right? So that would be my biggest concern with that, is how would it affect those two departments from doing what they need to do, if it would become a burden or not?
I think that's an important question. We don't have to figure out the exact answer to it tonight, but I do see that Christina and Dave are going to jump in, but I got to go to Monica first.
I think Dave might say something similar to me, because we've talked about this in code enforcement. When you talk about licensing animals, I agree with Mark. It's more of an auxiliary purpose. It's not going to solve the problem that we're talking about right here. It might help. And when we're talking about licensing animals, the main benefit is going to be animal welfare. When your dog gets lost, if your dog gets bitten by a raccoon with rabies, if we have, firm licensing in place, we're protecting our animals. And the hope would be that the fees from the licensure would pay for itself. So again, like a great idea, but it's kind of parallel and not really intersecting with this.
Sure, and I'm not suggesting that licensing itself resolves what we're trying to fix this morning or this evening. I'm saying it's one component that came up over and over again in the feedback that I received, and it's just one component. I think in a range of ideas that we may decide or decide not to recommend back to council. Let me go with Christina, and then let me go with Dave.
Yeah, I just wanted to remove the concerns of the amount of time staff would spend. There are some really good licensing programs out there that are probably heavy on the front end of getting them set up, but over time they really do run themselves with profit that could be made. So I'm not as concerned with that, so we won't take it off the table for that reason, but I do think licensing may be a good option for what Monica just said as well. For overall animal welfare, it's something our ranger would be able to manage when they can come on board, in addition to a lot of other issues they'll be addressing in our parks. So yeah, that's all I've got on that.
Good, appreciate that. The other interesting thing I heard was there were a couple of comments that we should license the dog owners because those are probably the ones that need to be licensed as opposed to the dogs. Dave?
I'm just going to reiterate exactly what Monica and Christina stated. We've done some research on this. It's not uncommon for cities to utilize a third party. It would not take extra staff. In fact, it would benefit the overall health and safety of our city. And I know Steve and Paul have both supported this and have expressed their support for licensing. So I'm just happy to hear that this is something that everyone can potentially have a consensus on and move forward with this.
Good, appreciate that. The other thing that okay, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. This is my opinion, but I think by and large, the dog owners at the parks, at least Jason Park, whenever this discussion comes up, they're willing to throw city council a bone, and they're willing to, create a revenue stream in order to, if that would help in terms of compromise and everything else. So I'm happy to hear, from Christina and Dave about the smoothness and, the lack of a logistical nightmare that it might create. That's really good. But yeah, we are willing to kick in and share other than our tax dollars, to, have use of the park.
Appreciate that. Good. When I could find something that we have a strong consensus on it, I always appreciate that. So the other thing that came along with licensing, and I know this may be a staffing issue, it may be any number of issues, but there was also a fairly strong sort of either opinion or a belief from the emails I got that once we figure this thing out, and once we come up with a solution and council gives it the okay and the go ahead, enforcement needs to be pretty tight. And I heard all the way around that enforcement was pretty lax in a number of different ways. And again, that just may be a staffing issue, but a number of folks said, look, we go through all this effort, we put all of this together, we come up with what we believe works, council buys it, the city puts money into it, and then for the scofflaws or the people who just don't want to pay attention to it, they need a fine, they need a citation, and it needs to be meaningful enough that they pay attention moving forward. That's another one of those assumptions I heard. If I'm completely off base in that, then somebody let me know, but that is something that I did hear moving forward. Martha, you got your hand up. You're on mute right now.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, like I was mentioning about the incident last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, where, I was not going to call the police on this incident, but the guy told me, call the police. What are they going to do? They're not going to do anything to me. And he was so sure of it that he just says, It's like a dime a dozen. You call because they're going to come and they're just going to slap my hand and then I'm going to go. So to me, the law enforcement, they have to be more strict and just give them all citations.
Okay. Steve?
Quick response. I did hear, I don't know if you were at, Martha, if you were at Jason Park or not, but I heard virtually the same incident happened with someone at Rotolo Park, a non-off-leash park. And, there was an interaction between someone that didn't have their dog on a leash. And, I think the police did end up showing up, and I don't know if I think they did cite the guy. But it doesn't matter where you are, in terms of the conflict, that's going to happen. I am sorry to say.
Yeah, and it is going to happen, but that's why I'm saying I think if more tickets were given, I think you would have less, we wouldn't be here, I would say.
Okay.
Okay, fair enough. One other piece I want to check with you. There were a number of comments. I would say not a lot, but there were at least some comments around the whole socialization component of this. And I got emails about trying to provide a place where families with dogs could interact with other families with dogs. And most of the comments came to me around, 2 weeks ago, we talked about there was a dog running up and down a slide, and there was a dog, up in one of those little fort places. And so the comment I got back was, wouldn't it be nice if we had one place or a couple of places where you had a picnic table, you had at least some kind of playground equipment that kids could play on, but it was very clearly a family and dog place. It wasn't mixed. And so if you decided to use that space, you were using it because you and your family wanted to be with other families and their dogs. So I don't know. You guys have to give me some feedback on that. Is that something we need to consider? Is that something that should be on our plate? What are you thinking? Martha?
Okay, Steve. My plan was more or less for Rotolo. I know people are against that because it's a flooded area. Well, it used to be until they fixed the pipes now. But I drew a picture of Rotolo. I don't know if you want me to show it or not, but it's got a fence on the very bottom, and this would just be for dogs and their families. And they can go in there, and we have slides in there, we have swings, so the kids want to play on the swings. We have picnic tables and benches. So this is just made for just the dogs and their families. But these dogs would not be able to go up on top of the bowl because that's for the kids. So they would have to stay on the bottom of the bowl to play with the families. And to me, I thought that would really eliminate a lot of, these other parts where people are getting upset because the dogs are running there. And I know that I've seen little T-ball players on the bottom of the bowl, but if this turns into a family dog park, the little kids can move up to Jason Park and play the T-balls because you'll have the space for, the soccer games, whatever games that they have up on Jason Park. So that was my thought about Rotolo Park. And in that way, it'll be open, from the, like 6 in the morning until 11 o'clock at night. And they can go in there whenever they want. And nobody can complain about the dogs being on the slide or, running after the kids, because anybody that's in that circle, in that bowl, belongs there. They want to be there.
Okay. Other thoughts, other comments when it comes to that kind of approach? Jake?
Well, see, I knew that was going to happen. Okay. Well, I would point out, Denver does not let any kids under the age of 11 into any of their dog parks. And I think maybe that is something Englewood could think about. Like, they could allow parents or guardians to bring kids into the dog parks. But I think, they have that rule for a reason. There's an inherent risk. And I do think it's quite possible that after all of these documented discussions we've all had about the risks of off-leash dogs and kids, that if the city does anything to explicitly encourage kids and off-leash dogs to cohabit a space, that if and when a bite does happen, I think the city could plausibly be held liable for it. I really don't think we should take away any existing playgrounds. Well, one thing I want to just quickly respond to earlier, Steve said something, if you fence off this area of Jason Park, we're losing 75% of the park. I would just like to point out, I lost 100% of the park because I've lived in Englewood since I was 6 and I played in Jason Park all the time when I was a kid. I don't take my kids there at all. I don't consider it an option. And so I think,
so I can appreciate that, Jake, but I want to stay with the family mixed component of dogs in parks right now.
No, where I was kind of going with that is just I think it would not be a good idea to include any existing playgrounds in this scheme because people would be losing something. Somebody would be losing something. And if the city wanted to like build new playground equipment, I guess they could think about that. It doesn't seem terribly likely, but I think generally explicitly encouraging kids and dogs to cohabit the space is not really a good idea. I think it's fine if there's a fenced area near a playground, you know, like at Jason Park. I mean, people can bring their dogs and their kids, but I think like building a playground for dogs to go down the slides with the kids or whatever, I just think it's kind of, I don't even think there's really much demand for it because as far as dogs and kids in Englewood go, I think the overpowering theme is conflict between the two groups.
Okay. Dave, you had your hand up, and then Mark.
Martha, I really appreciate how you are looking outside the box to try and accommodate everyone. As an expert in animal behaviors, I have to strongly caution this group and strongly caution on behalf of the city of putting little kids and dogs together. National statistics would probably recommend that we not do that. Animals are, and you'll see that most animal attacks and most severe animal attacks occur on children, not only because they're small, but because they inherently trigger behaviors that are already within the specific breed. I know that Alan can attest to this with youth sports. The whole reason that animals run over 2 kids is because they are a natural born small squeaky toy that triggers behaviors within dogs. Immediately run to them. They can't help it. It is part of their behavior. So I would just caution on behalf of the city exploring this type of an idea, especially, and this is why Denver doesn't allow children under 11 because of the potential liability and concern and the inherent triggers that will come with those behaviors. I really, really appreciate what you're saying, Martha.
Okay, let me go to Mark, and then Martha, I'll come back to you. Mark had his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So I've given a lot of thought to the idea that as we start to look at doing improvements and perhaps building out what I think of as being a well-designed enclosed dog park, that we could look at providing more amenities in those kinds of facilities than are present at Canine Corral. Now, my note is that there's things like water for the animals, and there's things like shade structures for the folks that are using those facilities. I hadn't really given much thought to the idea of something like a playground, but I do think there's an opportunity to think a little bit more creatively about other amenities that could be added to those places so that they're nicer and kept up, and frankly offer opportunities for stewardship by citizens, including citizens groups like Englewood Unleashed. Another thing I just want to take a chance to do is kind of remind everyone that there's already a project that's in the master plan to build out a fenced dog park at Cushing Park. And I think it would be one of reasonably large scale. And as far as I understand, and the folks on staff that know this, there's no obstacle to pursuing this project other than the ever-present need to get to fund it. But I think that I would really hope, and this was something that we included in our recommendation, was to really press forward on that and potentially use that new facility as what I think of as being a model for what could be applied maybe in some other units. And there's also, I'm sure, people have mixed feelings about Canine Corral and whether it is acceptable cosmetically, but I think there's opportunities to do improve some of the amenities in Canine Corral and make it an even more attractive space for off-leash dog use.
Great, appreciate that. Martha? And then was your hand up, Steve? Is that, okay. Martha and then Steve.
Okay, I just want to go back to what Dave was saying when he was saying that about the dogs attacking the kids. And I'm like, what is the difference between a fence at like adjacent park? I mean, because there's the young kids that are there as well, getting attacked. And the reason I put the playground in there is because there are dogs that do go on the playground at Jason Park. That's the only reason I put it in there. But if they're attacking, I mean, I don't see what the difference would, would make for the child to go in with the dog, because the parent would be there just like they are at Jason Park. I am with Mark, like Cushion Park and Canine Corral. I mean, Canine Corral was like one of the top 10 dog parks that I looked up. That one and that other one with Waikanen or something like that on Bellevue and Cat Canyon. Those two that were neighbor parks were up there as well. So, but my question is like, what is the difference between the two parks with the kids, I guess, Dave?
So I just want to highlight animal behavior and what triggers their instinct. I don't think there really is a difference. I will tell you that I think we're very fortunate that we don't have extreme encounters currently. I think we need to count our blessings. I think there is some compromise, and it's hard for me to speak on this because I have seen so many attacks. I've studied so many different attacks, horrific attacks. From my standpoint, I don't want to be in that situation where I'm responding to that. Let's be very clear. But to go back to what Mark is saying about adding different amenities and really building out parks, I know Lindsay and Christina and Dave Lee and Debbie and several of you travel the country and have also studied different dog parks. And I've seen some amazing. We went to one, fortunately, when we were visiting, and we took a dog out of a shelter to visit a park in Hawaii. They have a special program where you could take dogs out. They had like lava rock caves and all kinds of special things that we could offer and be really the leader in having a nice facility-driven dog park that draws people from all over.
That's great.
Appreciate that, Steve.
To respond to that, there's a gentleman that frequents Jason Park that takes his dog and I'll say he's a traveling salesman. And he said he's been all around the country, and Jason Park, he said, is the best dog park he's ever been to. So I'll just respond with that. And then what Mark said, I agree with what you said, Mark, about building out Cushing Park and funds are always an issue, but that's fine. But I wouldn't want then the response, the secondary to that being, well, now that we have this one, we can get rid of all the off-leash parks on the south side of town. It would very much disenfranchise the off-leash owners if all those parks were done away with, and then they have to travel north of Hamden, to get some off-leash time, otherwise, or crowd into Canine Corral. I would hate for that to be a natural consequence of investing money at Cushing. And quickly respond, if I can remember what Jake said, you mentioned documented incidents, and again, I don't see a whole lot of documentation for incidents in Englewood, Colorado. And you, Jake, you're not disenfranchised from Jason Park. You can go. You're electing not to go. You're not prevented from going.
So I don't want the two of you to go back and forth on whether or not you can get into Jason Park. That's not going to be where we need to go this evening. Jake?
Well, then I'll scratch one of the two things I was going to say. I would ask Dave Lewis. I seem to remember, I think it was at the study session, he mentioned that there was an attack of a child at Centennial Park, I believe, a bite of some kind. And I know there have also been more than one dog-on-dog attacks so far this year. So I seem to remember at the study session, I would just ask him to maybe confirm or deny my recollection. I seem to remember there was a bite of a child at Centennial.
Reported bite, yes. But we have all had other emails and conversations where bites or conflicts have been reported, but have not wanted to be pursued. So we do have documented cases of bites with animals, on animals, animals with adults, and animals with children. So we do have those conflicts in parks. They do happen.
I want to be careful that we don't go down what seems to me like a bit of a rabbit hole on how big of an issue this is, because we wouldn't be here if we weren't tasked with finding some kind of solution, some kind of idea to manage the interactions between off-leash dog owners and their pets and those who don't have pets. So I think we have to assume that there's enough conflict that council has said, come on guys, get together and figure this out. So I don't want to chase that rabbit hole too far. What I would like to do is I would like to spend this coming week, so you have about a week, I would be interested in hearing from you. And then again, this is not a reply all email, but I would ask you to contact me and share your ideas or your thoughts around how and where we might keep access to the existing off-leash parks in a way that provides some kind of enclosure. Some of you want a four-sided enclosure. Some of you want less than a four-sided enclosure. What I'd like to do is collect as many specific ideas as I can within the next week. I'll touch base with the city side and collect their ideas. I will pull all of that together and get that out to you by next Tuesday. And that will be kind of a collective group of ideas that then at our next meeting, I'm hoping we can talk through and we can go, okay, we can compromise, we can reach an agreement. Let's go with this and this and this when it comes to moving forward. So whether it's, amenities to the parks, whether it's, optional ways to enclose the off-leash dogs, whatever the case is, your ideas and suggestions, I'd like to collect those. Does that work okay for everybody? Any questions, any concerns about that?
When do you need this by?
I would like it by the weekend.
Okay.
Dave?
I had a question. I had a question. I guess it would be specifically for Christina. Is there an actual is there an actual design for a possible park at Cushing Park? Is there a layout? Is there some kind of design for that, or is this still in the, well, we think we can make this happen here, but we haven't really sketched it out yet?
Oh, that's a great question. We actually took this to council a while back. We do have an area designated for the off-leash dog park. It'd be a fenced dog park for the one reason, and would be because it's near the street. So Inca and Dartmouth on that northwest corner is what we've targeted for the dog park at Cushing. So there wouldn't be any conflict in the park over at Cushing with the activities that we already have going on. Cushing eventually will be completely renovated and it'll look a little bit different than it does now. But again, we have a completely designated spot for off-leash. It's a decent size. And we can send you the map where it's highlighted. There's no official design for it just yet. But we can send that to you guys so you have an idea of where that would be located.
Okay. Are you talking about, I'm actually looking at it right now on Google Earth. Are you talking about the part that's west of Inca? That little lump that's west of, that's sort of separate from the rest of the park?
Correct.
On the west side of Inca? Okay. Okay.
And I'll work with Christina to make sure that that is a part of the collective sort of package that we send out to everybody. I'd like you to have a chance to look at that package ahead of time so that when we do meet 2 weeks from tonight, you'll have had a chance to look at it and digest it and come up with what you think might work. I don't recall if there was another hand up that I was supposed to grab. Dave?
Before we adjourn, I was just asked to re-emphasize open meeting rules. And please make sure that when you're responding or answering questions, that you only direct this specifically to Steve, that we're not responding to all, or that we're having open conversation, because that would be a violation of this specific subcommittee task force of the Park and Recreation Committee. So I was asked just to bring that forward really fast.
I appreciate that, and I will continue to remind you not to hit the reply all button when you go, so appreciate that. Any other last comments? Okay, I will get this note out to you in the morning with a little more specifics around what I'm looking for after I've had a chance to sort of go through my notes and refine that a little bit. Debbie's always kind enough to send me a link to this recording. I will get that out to you tomorrow also. And I would just say, please do not hesitate to reach out to me between now and when we meet again. You've got my cell phone number, you got my email, you know how to get a hold of me. So please, don't be shy or bashful. Steve?
Will this be posted on the Englewood City website somewhere?
The recording of this?
Yeah.
Debbie, do you want to answer that? Dave? Dave?
Oh, sorry. Steve, under the Board and Commission webpage, under the city's website, I can send you a link to it if that would be easiest.
A link would be great. I'm just writing that down.
If you want to send that to me, Debbie, I will get all of that out in a packet tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay, we'll meet in a couple of weeks. We've got a lot of thinking and work to do. Thank you for your time this evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.